Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.
Hello and welcome to Capes on the Couch, where comics get counseling. I'm Anthony Sitko.
And I'm Dr. Issues.
This is issue number 126, Rogue, an interesting character. For those of us who grew up watching the X-Men animated series, you have a certain sound in your head when you hear or when you read Rogue, you hear that voice in your head. Nothing against Anna Paquin, who I thought did a fantastic job with the character in the X-Men movies, but there's just something about that kind of raspy Southern Belle sound. And of course, it's helped by how she's written, how her dialogue is written with, the AH for, I was talking to somebody, sugar, apostrophes at the end of all the words. It creates this sound in your head, which I'm going to completely mangle for this kid. Apologies in advance.
Well worth it.
So Rogue, created by Chris Claremont and Michael Golden in Avengers Annual number 10, August 1981. Interestingly enough, for a hero, this is not something that happens all the time. We don't really have a full, complete backstory. We don't know her last name. To this day, we still don't know Rogue's real last name. But we know her name is Anna Marie, and she was born in Mississippi, and her parents disappeared when she was young, and she was raised by her strict aunt. And so she rebelled as a teen, earning the nickname Rogue. After kissing a boy named Cody, her latent mutant abilities manifested, sending Cody into a coma, and she discovered that any skin-to-skin contact with a person would cause her to absorb their life force, and in some cases, their memories. So she covered herself up to avoid touching anyone ever again. She was discovered by Mystique, who began mentoring her and eventually brought her into the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. She was sent to attack Carol Danvers, and this is where we meet her on her first appearances after she has attacked Carol. And during the fight, prolonged contact caused Rogue to permanently absorb Carol's powers and gave Carol amnesia. And we discussed this a little bit in the Carol Danvers episode. But Rogue absorbed Carol's powers and also a portion of her personality, so to speak. The Danvers identity would remain with Rogue for many years, eventually causing Rogue to seek out Professor Xavier for assistance. So she did join the X-Men, slowly earning their trust and becoming a valuable teammate, even as Danvers continued to control her in periods of stress or unconsciousness. After losing her powers in a battle with Master Mold, she discovered the Danvers identity was also gone. So even though she was sad that she lost her powers, she was grateful that she no longer had to battle and grapple with the Danvers identity inside her head. That is dissociative identity disorder.
Don't.
I had to. Sorry. So as her powers returned, because comics, she also began an on-again, off-again relationship with Gambit, but her lack of physical intimacy and his dishonesty caused friction for a long time. Side note, I really can't wait. One of these days, we're going to do Gambit, and that's a character that I'm going to thoroughly enjoy. I'm going to research the bejesus out of a Cajun accent. I'm looking forward to that one. That's going to be a lot of fun to do.
Are you saying you guarantee?
Oh, I guarantee that's going to be a good time there. So after a battle with Destiny robbed them of both of their powers, they left the X-Men and moved in together to explore their relationship. So after yet another battle with Mystique where her foster mother tried to kill her, she absorbed Mystique's powers and basically left her for dead. Then she went to the Australian outback to figure out how to control her powers. With the help of Xavier, she was finally able to control her absorption for the first time in her life. She eventually started a relationship with Magneto, of all people, although it was largely long distance as they both had other commitments. And during the Avengers versus X-Men, she kind of originally stayed neutral because even though she was clearly an X-Man, she also had a lot of friends on the Avengers side. but she joined the staff of the Xavier Institute and formally sided with the mutants after a fight broke out on campus and She-Hulk inadvertently injured some of the mutant children. Then she turned down a marriage proposal from Magneto and ended that relationship. She joined the Avengers Unity Division as a mutant representative, and you can read about that in Uncanny Avengers. She eventually became the field leader. She restarted her relationship with Gambit, and after Kitty Pryde turned into a runaway bride and left Colossus at the altar, Gambit proposed to Rogue on the spot during what would have been the reception, and they got married instead. And then they were transported to the Mojoverse during their honeymoon, since Mojo wanted a famous couple for his new show, because that's who Mojo is. And you can go back and listen to that hilarious episode. That was definitely one of the more fun skits we did on the show, is the Mojo one. Yep. That's really the big hits for Rogue. I mean, we can go in more in depth on a lot of the mutant stories. She's been a major part of the X-Men mythos for the past 40 years, but I really just kind of wanted to hit the key points. She's a character that, again, only 40 years, but still has been involved in a lot of stories in that time. So let's move right away into the issues then. So we're going to start this off sort of chronologically. The authoritarian upbringing caused her to rebel, and that's where the whole Rogue nickname came from. And I think it's very relatable, obviously, for people to know that if you are raised in a strict household, it's human nature. You're going to want to press those boundaries. You're going to want to do everything you can to break the mold and become your own individual. And so when she was dealing with her aunt, who was very controlling, it was a lot of "you're not my real mom" kind of deal, and I'm going to do what I want, consequences be damned. And we see that have a lasting impact even into her adult life, even into her romantic relationships, even into her dealings with the other X-Men. But let's talk a little bit about how that upbringing impacted her as an adult.
So part of our job as adolescents developing, and children even before that, is we have to become aware of what our responsibilities are and our capabilities are, and getting that feedback from other people. Having someone who is too authoritarian, I'll take out the two, because I think there's a wide range of what would be considered acceptable in terms of boundaries. You're going to end up with a person that knows that there are consequences to their actions, and that's a good thing. But also, depending on the person's personality, depending on their intelligence, depending on their proclivity, energy, impulsivity, all of those factors, not to mention any other underlying predisposed psychological things that happened before they were with this, in this case, her aunt, but any foster person or adoptive person or other family member or social structure, they're going to potentially not just test boundaries. They may notice that the consequences aren't finite. They are much more nebulous than we realize. And what I'm about to say is a little scary if some of you listening to this have children that are also listening to this, because that's not my intention. I have a child of my own. But aside from the idea of corporal punishment, when you tell a teenager, don't do this or else, or that classic, I'm going to count to 3, how many of us actually know what happens at 3? Because we have the nature to say, okay, well, for whatever reason, this is the one area we don't go to. There are some people that don't really care because they've already come to the conclusion that there really is nothing after 3. And while there may be some sort of expectation that the authority figures in your life are meant to be respected and you're supposed to do what you're told, they find out very quickly that that's just in your household. And I can go outside of that anytime that I want and do what I want. And unless we're talking about the police or something, I still won't have any consequences. And if I do something and the police don't know about it, I still won't get caught for that. And by definition, if I'm not getting caught for something, is that really wrong? This is not a philosophy I'm saying I agree with. This is something that I'm saying people can develop if that's the experience that they have, as well as the people that they hang around with. Peers are important. Peers are way more important than we give them credit for, especially as you become a teenager and a young adult. So, with all of that in mind, you have someone that's already been taken out of a situation where they don't even have much knowledge of what happened before them. All they have is what they've been given by the person that has been placed in a situation where they have to keep this person safe. But then the child in question clearly has things above and beyond what that person would have in terms of expectations. And there is a disconnect. Once you have that disconnect, then it's pretty much the Wild West. And I love the name Rogue because it certainly fits, and everything that happens after that clearly goes along with that. But the idea that once you open that Pandora's box of anything is a possibility, then that also means that anything can potentially be a challenge and anything can potentially go wrong. It doesn't all have to be negative. It can be positive in many different ways. But if you don't have a person that's willing to recognize that their style isn't working or their style isn't fitting the circumstance, then you're not going to get the proper feedback to rein it in. I'm not saying that a person who tends towards an authoritarian nature of parenting has to all of a sudden become this doormat. That's not what I'm advocating. What I'm saying is you have to at least be willing to have the conversation with this person that ultimately is going to be an adult. Because if you only treat them as this child under your thumb, then they're going to become the adult that never had a thumb to begin with.
Yeah, very well said. Speaking as the father of a 2-year-old who has, as of late, really been testing his boundaries. Really testing the boundaries, especially at bedtime and nap time. God, I love him. I need to remind myself of that. No, I do. I adore him. He's a handful. It's part of the process. We've all done it. It's a question of how far does it go before it goes from boundary testing to you are putting yourself in a very, very bad situation. And you speak about the disconnect. One of the things that I think people need to learn, and my sister preaches this all the time, the word discipline actually originally at the root means to teach. And so when we focus on the punitive aspect of these, of discipline, I think we're getting away from what it really should and could be used for. And so I think it is a balance, certainly, as parents or caregivers, to strike that balance of wanting to keep the child safe while also giving them the freedom to express themselves. And obviously as the child gets older, they're going to be at more and more risk of the really dangerous types of situations. But if the child, or in this case, the adolescent, understands that the caregiver is just going to make idle threats, so to speak, without any real attempt to back them up, then everything they say is suspect and you've lost the credibility. And we've spoken about this previously on the show. Children and adolescents have very finely tuned bullshit detectors, and they will know, I don't know how, but they will know if you're being real, if you're being authentic about these things. And that's why you can't lose that. You can't lose that credibility. And so, at least for me as a parent, and some of the things that, obviously I still have quite a ways to go before I reach that point, but I would rather err on the side of, giving them the freedom, because if I come down too heavy-handed and it turns out that it's not as dire a situation as I originally presented it, or other people originally presented it, cough, cough, drugs, then you go, what else are you lying about? And then you lose that credibility. I think it's much better to be honest and say, listen, there are dangers here, but not everything is going, it's not a binary. That's not a pun on Carol Danvers, but it's not a binary. It's not everything is okay or worst case scenario. There's a spectrum there. Monica Rambeau. We're just going for all the Ms. Marvel names here, but it is a spectrum. And I think if you keep that in mind, again, speaking from the point of view of two parents, if you keep that in mind and you maintain that honesty of saying, it's not the worst thing in the world, but these, there are risks, but I'm not going to bring down the hammer on you if you make a mistake, because if you do that, you're basically telling the child, you can never make a mistake around me because I will nail you to the wall.
Yeah.
And then the child's never going to come to you with anything, big or small.
Yeah. That touches on a variation of the idea that you're trying to create an infallible person. Since that is a misnomer and that's not possible, by definition, the time that they fail, that's the time where they need your honesty and support. Or another way that I like to put it, what's your number one rule? Whatever it is, I'm not telling you what it has to be. I'm just saying, what's your number one rule? Make sure your child knows that is the number one rule. And the one thing that if that's broken, then there's going to be serious consequences and it's going to be painful and it's going to be hurtful. I'm talking emotional. I'm not talking necessarily physical or anything, but that's really going to do some damage to the family and to themselves, and let them know that ahead of time and recognize that anything above and beyond that, anything besides that is something that's going to be a discussion. I think having that foundation works a lot better in general, in my experience, compared to the idea that, well, everything is the hard and fast number one rule. When you start doing that, then you're making it a roulette wheel. You're making it Russian roulette, really, depending on the circumstance that you're talking about. So
exactly. If everything is the most dire, then nothing is.
So yeah, rather than letting the kids spin that chamber, pulling the trigger each time, saying ha ha ha, see, why not let them know? No, this really is the number one thing, and everything else has its own limitations and whatever. Don't do these certain things. I don't think it sounds stupid or whatever. However you decide to talk about it. I'm not telling people how they need to be. It's more like whatever your system is and your spectrum is, because we want your culture to be involved in it. We want your own personal experiences to be involved in it. That's what makes us all unique. That's what makes us great. But making sure that you know that at some point, that's going to be integrated with everyone else around them. And if you haven't accounted for that, that can also lead to its own set of circumstances. But I'm sure that's another podcast for another character.
Oh, well, I was going to say that's a parenting podcast at this point, because, as soon as your kid goes to somebody else's house and, oh, Timmy can swear at his mom, and then you've lost the war. But I digress. So the next issue is clearly related to her powers. The inability to touch anyone created myriad problems in her relationships, both romantic and platonic. And it took decades of publication history and, at least 15 years of in-universe time on the very clearly sliding Marvel timescale. But it took a long time for her to be able to control the power and her ability to touch someone without causing them great physical harm. And again, this is something that I thought was done very well in the movies, that no matter what Rogue was going through, she still couldn't touch Bobby. She couldn't touch Logan, without the gloves. And the gloves and the clothing do allow that contact, but there is still something to be said for skin to skin. I mean, it's a reason why they put newborns directly on mothers and fathers, right after they're born. There have been clearly studies shown that skin to skin contact, it's one of the clearest forms of intimacy that we have. And so the inability for Rogue to have that has definitely caused some issues.
So when you first think of this topic, don't take it so literal. I get the idea that she has superpowers that absorb energy from people and can ultimately kill them or whatever. That's not exactly the point. There are plenty of ways this can apply in real life. If someone has gone through, let's say, a sexual trauma, and they now have acute stress followed by PTSD related to anything when it comes to intimacy, being alone with a person, or even having romantic feelings for a person, that can be one level. If you have someone who has a severe autoimmune situation where they're immunocompromised, I should say, and therefore the types of interactions they can have in the world are very limited. The most dramatic real life example is the idea of a person, referred to as the bubble boy. There's also the idea that some people simply don't have the same drives as everyone else when it comes to romantic relationships. And that may be for a season of their life. That may be something that they've decided for themselves. Or some people that struggle with that, for example, and I'm not trying to make this controversial, the idea of some people that choose a life of celibacy or simply that they're not going to ever be involved in that circumstance. But then at some point in their career, they do develop romantic feelings with a consenting adult. I wasn't going where you thought I was going. So all these different circumstances all point to the one thing, though, that has kept us alive as a species, which is we want to be together. And I'm not even talking about whether or not you mentioned in the issue itself, typing it out, this can be platonic too. Just the idea that we all want to be with each other. We want to experience this. What did we just go through for over a year now that we're just getting back to doing these things again? And I can tell you, it's created a circumstance of overwhelming anxiety, both good and bad, because we know this is what we are born to do. It's innate. It really is. So imagine someone putting up that barrier, not because of a pandemic or anything like that, but just in general, and saying you're not going to, for one emotional or physical reason or another, you're not going to be able to have that. The one thing that really drives us every day, and we can't have that? Boy, oh boy, I really hope you start to develop some other coping mechanisms until you are able to find the comfort to get that one way or another. Because we're really talking true devastation. It's not just the idea that you want something for the pure pleasure of it. It's that you want that for survival. That's above and beyond. That's a hierarchy of needs thing. That's not just a convenience thing. And when our hierarchy is threatened like that, we tend to lash out in more ways than one. And once again, from an emotional standpoint, as I've said many times, that can be anger. It can be outward anger towards others. It can be inward anger, depression. It can be isolation. It can be the feelings of loneliness, sadness, maybe not that drastic, melancholy. It could be the tension of what if this never happens? All of those things together. And for someone like Rogue to actually see the consequences, that's the added part in the comics and the movies and every other iteration and the cartoon, where that brings to life way better and way more visceral than anything that I've described in our real world. That you're scared that your closest connection to someone may actually do them harm. That is not the base at which we work at. And if we feel we're in that situation, then that's really when hopelessness can set in. And so, brief call to action. If anyone actually feels that way, be it in a relationship, be it in a family, even in a work environment where you feel like you're doing more harm than good. If that's truly the way you feel, I would hope that you start to address that, because often it's an internal perception versus external. And as always, you reach out the best you can to someone, because it definitely doesn't have to be that way. Just because it's that way in the moment doesn't mean that's the way it has to stay. So I can't, I'll be honest. Yeah, I can't imagine with someone like Rogue. You mentioned how long she was managing that. I can't imagine 14 minutes really feeling that way, let alone 14 years.
Yeah. And you did mention the bubble boy. Colloquially, I was going to reference at some point during the out of universe treatment, the idea of someone with an autoimmune disorder that would have to live in a very sterilized environment and be unable to have human contact. And I was going to reference, the case. So thank you for bringing that up. As always, you and I are on the same page with that. But yeah, I understand, especially now, we're in 16 months of this pandemic. I've just recently gone back to the office because our state, New Jersey has seen the infection rate drop and the hospitalization rate drop. And so they're saying, okay, let's everybody get back to work. But it has really done a number on people to not be able to interact with folks. And my wife and I were actually just discussing this last night that, at the beginning of the pandemic, when there was a lot of fear and we didn't know nearly as much about the virus as we do now and everything, my mother is immunocompromised. And so it was a whole, I can't even really get within like 6 feet. We didn't really know about masks and they weren't talking a lot about social distancing at that point and everything. And I was just like, I don't know when I'm going to be able to see my parents again because I don't want to get my mom sick, because if she got COVID, she's done. Like, that's it. There would be no recovery for her. So, and I know my story is not the only one like that. And there's lots of folks that have gone through that over the past 60 months. There are people who will never see their family again because they didn't get a chance to say goodbye because they died because of COVID. So there's a whole litany of things that have really brought a lot of these discussion topics, made them very real and very personal to a lot of people. And we've talked about the pandemic and its impact and everything. So I don't want to completely belabor the point, but obviously there are a lot of real world corollaries between what Rogue has gone through and what many people have experienced over the past year and a half, and in some cases still continue to experience. So I don't think it's that far-fetched as you had indicated. So the last thing is the broken relationship that she has with her foster mother, Mystique. They alternate between trying to kill each other and trying to work together. And I think it's safe to say that a lot of folks have some perilous and potentially difficult relationships with a parental figure. It could be a biological parent, could be a step parent, could be a foster parent, etc. So there's some real rooted psychology in there. And then you add on the superpowers and the trying to actively murder people. And that just really takes it to a whole other level. But let's focus more on the real rooted psychology, keeping in mind, of course, that you are not, a family therapist.
Thank you for that disclaimer.
We could bring in, I think, Ben from Popcorn Psych. I think Ben is the family therapist, right?
No, Ben still does individual.
Right.
It might be Brittany. I apologize. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I remember. I know each of them covers a different aspect. So
yeah,
we're going to have them on, or we're going to do a guest spot with them in a couple of months anyway. So I'm sure we'll address that when the time comes. But anyway.
Well, the premise, once again, we're kind of adapting this from point one. So we're not talking specifically about any one family member or guardian or foster parent or biological parent or whatever. The idea is you have someone that is in a position of potentially mentor-mentee or teacher-student or whatever. I mean, just the idea there's a hierarchy. One person is meant to be an example and giving guidance and leadership to another person as they walk through life. From that standpoint, that's a huge responsibility. We've gone over that several times. This one, though, is much more visceral in the sense that each time they have an interaction, they know that it's going to have strong and intense emotion. That's not true for everybody. There are plenty of people in this world, and I know it's true for me, but I want to say this because for some people, this is their life. This is their day-to-day. They know that there are certain people that they are going to be in contact with that no matter what, be it a phone call, text, video, in person, or even just hearing from someone else, that it's going to be a dramatic event. It's going to lead to a lot of laughing, a lot of dancing, a lot of crying, a lot of anger, a lot of fighting, full spectrum, whatever those things may be. But whatever it is, it's going to be intense. So for some people, that can lead to the idea, especially when you look at how Mystique and Rogue interact, they're going to pick their spots. So when Mystique shows up and basically it's pretty clear she's very angry. She just wants to get rid of her. Then it's not really a question anymore. It's just, all right, I guess I'm going to have to survive this. And it's, if I have to survive it and you're not going to stop, then I guess I'm just going to kill you. Thankfully, in real life, that doesn't happen that way because there's an underlying basis to this. It's the idea that you actually want the relationship to continue. That's the bizarre part when it comes to relationships this intense. There is I like to call a silent contract that no matter what I say or do, I know that I'm going to have another interaction with you as long as we're alive. And as long as that contract is there, then for many people, they unfortunately don't speak it out as they should, but there's this unspoken rule that there's a certain line, and if it gets crossed, then we stop talking for a while. And then at some point, as if nothing ever happened, either a person forgets or they just decide they have a change of heart, they'll try it again. And maybe it has a positive reaction this time, and they try it a few more times and it goes back to a negative reaction and they stop again. And it's just this start and stop potentially for their whole lifetimes. It's a very unique way to go about life. I'm not here to pass judgment on those situations. My main thing about it, I have a proclivity to shy away from those types of situations. And you know, I only because I know I only have so much emotional and mental energy to go around. But at the same time, I'm not trying to say that the relationships aren't worth it. My thing is, I think my goal and a family therapist goal would be, okay, how do we get this so that instead of it being a rocket ship that then comes crashing down to Earth and just keeps creating these, like, to the moon and exploding back down in fire and turmoil, how do we get it so that it's closer to a roller coaster ride? Because people like roller coaster rides because they know they're on rails and they're just going to be within certain boundaries, and it's not going to get that wild and not going to potentially risk everything every single time. So that's where I look at this type of situation. I'm not going to be as literal as like, okay, they're at it and they're going to kill each other. Because in real life, once again, if that's how things are, then it really is best for people to go their separate ways, blood relative or not. Just saying. But if it's not at that point, and it is something that both parties, once again, instead of being unspoken, to speak it out loud that you want the relationship to continue, then can we tamper the boundaries just a little bit so that everyone can get some level of consistency and enjoyment instead of all those huge fluctuations that just lead to the type of stress responses that shorten each person involved's lifespans? That's all I'm asking.
Well, that sounds like a simple request that there should be no issue whatsoever with resolving that. So sure, let's do that. It's fairly easy to implement. There won't be any blowback at all from anybody. Nope. I don't foresee any complications with that whatsoever. None.
Oh, man.
Thank you for your insight, Doc.
You know, it's fascinating to see this happen with so many people and recognizing that it happens in your own life. And that's my point. Anything about this show, if for whatever reason this is the first episode you come in on, I'm not saying that from a pedestal, okay? I'm saying that from the ground floor, baby.
Yes. Yes, you are. So we're going to take a break, plug our sponsor and a couple of other shows. And when we get back, we'll get into treatment. Stay tuned. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. Is there something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? BetterHelp will assess your individual needs and match you with a licensed professional therapist. You can begin communicating within 48 hours.
It isn't a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional counseling done securely online. BetterHelp has a network of over 15,000 counselors with a broad range of expertise. You can log in and message your counselor anytime and get timely and thoughtful responses. You can also schedule regular video or phone sessions. No waiting room required.
BetterHelp is committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches, so they make it easy and free to change counselors if you feel you don't have a good connection. It's more affordable than traditional offline counseling, and financial help is available. BetterHelp wants you to start living a happier life today. Visit betterhelp.com/capes, that's better HELP, and join the over 1 million people taking charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional.
Special offer for Capes on the Couch fans. Get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/capes.
I'm Harrison.
I'm Jordan.
Well, I'm Harrison.
I'm Jordan.
All right!
And we're the Grief Rio podcast. Let us be your unnatural Sherpa guides on this existential plane of mountainous game and movie exploration.
And don't forget about that spookiness that lives within us all, but mainly in you, you spooky bitch.
How dare I'm offended.
We've been voted the best podcast to listen to by many.
By many, that means a few. That's more than one.
Results may vary. We'll see you on the next episode of Grief
Burrito, yeah!
Yes!
Hello, I'm Chris Claremont. You're listening to Capes on the Couch.
And we're back. Treatment in universe for Anna Marie.
Oh my goodness. This one's going to be a little hard because I can't help but think of sometimes children on the autism spectrum, and adults too, I don't want to exclude anyone, have some tactile issues and therefore they need some sensory input. I'm glad that so far Rogue has been able to demonstrate some control of her powers, but I've always wondered this. I always wondered what would happen if she tried to just use them in a way that would allow her to express energy rather than absorb it. And I know that sounds weird because you're a mutant. You can't change what your powers are. But my thing is, if for whatever reason what you're doing is quote unquote parasitic, meaning you're taking things from one source and using it for your own purposes, energy flows in more than one direction. And that energy has to be expelled in some way. So I would think that the process can happen where if somehow, and this is the type of thing that's beyond my capability, I'll admit it, you would have to get some real powerful players involved in this. We've seen it with other mutants. You see the kinetic charges that of all people Gambit could do. You see what Jubilee has done. You see that the idea, Bishop is probably the best example. You can transmute things. You can take one form of energy and actually do something with it. And I think the best thing for her, if not to quote unquote absorb other people's powers again, but to actually take one of those mutants with consent and with humongous supervision to find out what their processes are for that end of the spectrum, I think that her body and more importantly, her mind would allow her to change how she views it. Because I think there's a lot to it. I don't think it's just the idea that she has these powers. I think it's the idea that she felt she lacked control. And that was the one way that she was always able to continue to grasp it. And once she realizes that through others, there is a way to express yourself in the world without causing harm, I think we can come to some sort of neutral ground. Obviously, this is something that would be incredibly dangerous, but, no guts, no glory.
All right. Bringing in Bishop. There's a character that doesn't get bandied about, at least on this show, like ever.
Hey, what can I say? He's my secret boy. I don't really talk about him that much, but boy, oh boy, when I first learned about him, and I'll be honest, I first learned about him through the cartoon, I'm like, wait a minute. You're telling me there's a time-traveling mutant that can literally just transfer energy through his body that I'm like, how is this not more vital? And actually, he ended up being incredibly vital, but he ended up being formed more as like a villainous role in certain points. And I'm like, okay, that's one way to go about it. But I've always been fascinated by that character.
All right. We'll add him to the master list then one of these days. Hey, I mean, I know of him. I can't ever say that I probably in my life have read maybe 5 books, and I'm talking like individual issues that he's been in. Not a big X reader. But if he's your secret boy, then all right, I'll give it a shot. Out of universe. So we mentioned earlier someone with an autoimmune disorder who's not able to have contact with people, who also had maybe an abusive upbringing with, authoritarian caregivers, a foster parent perhaps, who did not always have the best interest at heart. That maybe, now I'm just sort of monologuing, maybe someone whose foster parent wanted to take advantage of this person and, sort of like a Munchausen's by proxy type scenario.
Okay.
But I mean, there's a whole number of areas in which this could go totally pear-shaped, but.
Right. Well, since you're bringing that up, I can tell you firsthand some of the ways that can really get messed up. And what I'm about to say sounds very harsh, and it's not meant to, but it's the truth. If you're dealing with someone's historical information, at a certain level, you take it at face value, but then there is this concept of trust but verify. So if someone makes an accusation, let's say it's years later, let's say it's not in the moment, or even that foster parent that you're mentioning, maybe they've already died. So there's nothing that could be done about it anyway. That eliminates one part of it. But then there's the other part of, given my line of work, and especially the area that I work in, I always have to wonder, okay, how valid is this statement? Is this accurate? First of all, because there's a different treatment modality if someone is not telling reality the way it is. I would then have to discern, is that the truth or is that delusional? And I'm going to throw that away, not ignoring it, but pointing out, let's say we've already done our due diligence. Okay, I definitely agree with the veracity of the statements, and this was a horrible scenario that this person has experienced. In addition to having an ongoing medical diagnosis that now limits their contact with people and therefore limits intimacy. Or the trauma itself, even if they didn't have an immunodeficiency, that just makes it very difficult to trust any physical interaction with someone. And this can also be present in, for example, in people with certain forms of autism spectrum. There's or OCD. Oh my goodness, to not forget about that. So there's many variations where this could have happened. Whatever they were, it's not so much to immediately just continue to harp on the past of everything that happened once you gather the appropriate information. After that, it's finding out what they want to do next. Because there is an acknowledgement that there's a wide range of what people may want to do. If the person sets their goal as, I then want to find my person, I want to find the one person that is truly going to understand me, and once I find them, then everything's going to be just fine. Well, I can't grant that as a therapist, as a psychiatrist. I have no power or authority to do that. I have no problem with the person having the hope of that. But I also don't want to mislead them and say, oh, well, there is that one person. And I know that it's a very romantic statement, and I apologize for if I'm raining on people's parades here. That's not my intention. It's just the idea that there may be a range of limited circumstances of people that are going to match highly correlationally to what you want in life. I think that's a better way to phrase it because it gives the realm of opportunity above and beyond what that individual person can see. In other words, don't worry about, pardon to use the trope, don't worry about the prince or the princess locked in a tower that magically is going to be found and, they're your one knight in shining armor. I know I'm mixing metaphors, but the point still stands. I want the person to know that any step towards more than what they are experiencing now is a positive emotional step. If you have noticed that you shut down with every new interaction after 5 minutes, then my goal is to see if we can extend it to 10 and then 15. And then after that, if it's just one interaction, then what about 2? What about a room of people? To make sure that the person recognizes that there is no one final goal. It's more the process, and eventually the process itself taking over and being its own reward. Because you can do a process of something for the rest of your life. You only have a goal until that goal is met. And once that goal is met, then some of us, once again, not saying it's imaginary, I'm saying it's me. Once that goal is met, you tend to just kind of shut off until there's another goal to be found. And if you don't find it, you're kind of wandering aimlessly. So if you can get the person first to use their own goals. So let's say in this case, I want to be able to go out on a date. Great. Wonderful. All right. That date bombed. Okay. There's nothing wrong with that. What was the one part that got you most excited? What was the part that you were most scared of? What was the part that went wrong and what was that emotion? Tell me about that emotion and then the fact that you have survived it because you're talking to me right now. Grounding it all in that basis. And then from there saying, all right, so what can we make better about this process the next time so that you get closer to that goal of having a second date with the same person? But in this case, it's going to be a different person. That's fine too. In other words, just being that practical about it step by step until the process itself. In other words, even if this person never quote unquote finds their soulmate, they can still enjoy the idea of dating for as long as they want to. That is okay too. I fear sometimes that people get the idea that you only have to look for the one, And I don't want to make it sound so Pollyanna either, that I don't want people to just get to the point that it's not just Mr. Right, it's Mr. Right now, like all the time. I don't want it to be that flippant. I want people to develop deep relationships. But when you have the proper process, then it's much more naturally and much more likely to happen in a way that's going to be more enjoyable for you along the way so that you can keep at it and just keep making those minor iterations. And be that with a therapist, be that with your personal friend group, be that with your family, whatever it is. When you look at it that way, start with a goal, figure out what the steps are to reach that goal, but then realize, make that process to that goal so enjoyable, it doesn't matter what the next goal is. You're just going to keep doing it and you're going to keep enjoying it. It's because I can already see some people saying, okay, Mr. Wise Guy, you're saying that, but what if I do find the right person? I don't need to go on multiple dates. I said, oh, but do you? Don't tell me you stopped dating your spouse. Please don't tell me that. Don't tell me that you still don't enjoy the times that you dedicate to each other to get to know each other better and find out what's going on in their lives and how you can ingratiate yourself both by improving what you want as well as finding out what the other person wants. I really hope you continue to do that because that's how a marriage grows and changes. So, or even if you're not married, if you just have a long-term relationship, once again, not just romantic, if it's with friends, if it's with family, don't tell me you don't do that too. This process is true for everything. So once again, I get that human nature is to focus on the goals, and that's a wonderful thing. But step by step, look at the process of what you're doing to accomplish those goals, especially in relationships, and make sure that that process is as enjoyable as possible, because that is how those goals not only get met, but it doesn't even matter how far they reach.
You covered a lot of ground there.
This is what happens when I have time off, man.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I love it. I just let you go. I'm just saying there's so much there. I can't cherry pick one thing to talk about because you made so many fantastic salient points. I don't even know, honestly, which of these clips I'm going to take and use as the Instagram thing. It's going to be something from that long piece because I tend to love what it is that you say and how you say it. I'm going to have to figure out a way to edit it down to 60 seconds, but oh boy. So thank you for that. So let's see what happens when we get Rogue on Dr. Issues' couch.
Hello, Rogue. I'm Dr. Issues.
Well, hey there, sugar.
So what can I do for you?
I don't know. What can you do?
Hardy har har. I have the ability to listen to what you have to say, synthesize that dialogue in a way that may have some benefit to you and your relationships, while monitoring for any signs of a formal diagnosis that needs more focused treatment.
Shoot, I thought you were going to get all flustered like most guys do when someone like me talks coy with them.
I got over that a long time ago.
Must be nice.
Nah.
Well, I guess that's my way of saying I'm stuck. I either push people away too quickly or I dive in and get myself into stuff I just can't walk out of.
Why not?
Well, that's a real easy one. Do you know about my powers?
I do my homework, sure.
So imagine if your first chance at a physical connection, you destroy their life. I mean, really destroy it. You don't get over that. There's no amount of talking that can fix that.
I'm terribly sorry. From the tone in your voice, I could tell it wasn't intentional.
Oh, but it doesn't stop there. I mean, I was led to do some horrible things to people and I didn't know the consequences. That's the kind of thing that some people can't ever live with themselves over. Do you understand a little bit about what I'm saying?
Has it ever gotten to that point for you where life itself wasn't worth it anymore?
No. Well, not like that, but I mean, to disappear, to not hurt anybody, that's the type of thing I wish for sometimes.
Well, this next question is meant to get to something deep here, so please don't think I'm trying to lead you. Why haven't you disappeared?
Honey, that's like trying to hide the juggernaut in the kiddie pool. That dog won't hunt. Besides, every time I did walk away, my past came back to bite me. So I gave up on trying to run.
So anonymity doesn't work, but your powers are a huge factor in any basic intimacy. Wow. I have to say, I'm impressed with how you've continued to persevere as well as you have.
Thanks. Not many people see it that way besides you.
Well, I'm still glad to hear that there's more than just me.
Are you always trying to see the glass as half full?
Well, I try to see the glass with whatever amounts inside, as well as the contents, the condition of the glass.
I get the point. No stone unturned, I suppose. So does that mean you want to know who sees the good in me?
Of course.
All right, well, let's start with Remy, number one. That man, there's something about that man. It's hard to describe. He just, he lights me up inside.
Oh, that's sweet.
Now, hold on. I don't want it to sound all peaches and cream. I mean, when it's good, it's finer than frog hair, but he's got a real stubborn streak. And when he doesn't get his way, he doubles down on how he feels. Shucks, I think sometimes he argues with me just to watch me burn up.
Maybe. I don't want to speculate on him since I don't know him as well as you do, but you're the one who says it makes you feel that way. That type of bond doesn't happen overnight.
Damn right it doesn't. How many people get told they have to wait for the right time, and that time might be never? Well, he was there for all of it. Even when I went my own way, he came right back to me no matter what.
Well, as with most relationships, that sounds like a two-way street. However, you got to the point that you're on a similar wavelength, and I'm genuinely happy for you, so... To be honest, if you're doing okay with that aspect of things, maybe there's another part of your life that's challenging you.
Everything.
I see that that's your style of response to a lot of things, but can we please drill down a bit?
Can we not and say we did?
Rogue, I'm really not a hard ass. You don't have to be scared of a psychiatrist.
Oh, sugar, I'm not scared of you. I'm scared of what I'll say to you. You probably lock up half the people you see just for speaking their mind.
I only look out for the safety of my patients and the rest of society. Having emotions is not a risk. It's what you do with those emotions that counts. As long as you're not a danger to yourself or others, then all of this is completely confidential. And if it's in the past, then I'd never put you through, like a double jeopardy thing.
So if I told you that my second mama wanted to kill me after I made up with the woman she had me nearly kill and take her life, you're not going to arrest me?
Look, I didn't quite expect that, but no. My main concern is
How did it make me feel? How do you think?
a lot of people have that reaction, which is why I was going to ask, how did that affect the people involved?
Son of a gun. Nobody really asked that. I suppose Carol was really pissed off. Wait, I know she was pissed off. And Mystique, Mom, Mystique was mean, but she always said it was because she cared. I think that's true, and she really cared about me in her own sort of way. She should really talk to you if you'll have her.
I'm always an open mind and ear for anybody within reason.
And the reason part might be a problem.
Understood. So what's your goal with those relationships?
I'm not a goals kind of gal. Where the wind blows, I'll be there, good Lord willing, and the creek don't rise. Unless I don't want to go, that is.
And hence the name. There's nothing wrong with riding the tide, going where nature follows. But on the other hand, there's nothing wrong inherently with bucking a trend either. It's the balance of those two that gets out of whack. You know, it's kind of obvious to me that you have the ability to do whatever you please, but so many times you've been the center of attention for others because of your talent. So why not take that impulsive energy, combine it with a modest bit of foresight, and live the more comfortable, less stressful life that you deserve?
Believe it or not, Doc, I actually did have some good come out of all that we were just talking about. I mean, Carol doesn't hate me anymore. And when things are good with Mystique, we do work well together. I'm not as dumb as you think I am just because my nature is to fight with whatever anybody says.
Whoa, I never thought that.
There's that flustered part I always look for when I meet someone new.
Touche. So now that you've made it clear you can create any social outcome you want, how much are you willing to focus on making them enjoyable for everyone involved?
One thing at a time, sugar. One thing at a time. We good here?
That we are.
Well, thanks for the chat then. I'll see you around. And if you ever do talk to my mama, tell her I said hi. Well, maybe see how she reacts before bringing me up. It could be a bad time for you. There's just something about Southern expressions and just the turns of phrase that they use. It's just an enjoyable experience to listen and to write those kinds of things and just those little expressions that they use. I love it. And it makes it fun for me. You know, I always try to throw those little local colloquialisms in just to give it that little bit of extra flair. And when you're writing a character from the South, there is no shortage of those kinds of expressions. I will put it that way.
Yeah, it's definitely unique. And I have to say that this is just a basic tendency on my part. Thanks, Dad. Where if I hear a certain accent, I start to try and mimic it. But thanks to this podcast, I don't do that nearly as much as I used to. And Anthony can attest to that.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to do that too. It's just more of like a subconscious thing. It's because I grew up doing voices and accents and impressions and stuff. So when I'm listening to somebody talk, I will subconsciously pick up on things that they say and the way that they say them. And my current speech pattern and my current expressions and vocabulary that I have is really a hodgepodge of everybody that I've met over the course of my life, and all sort of just married together and, you know, stirred up with this Jersey accent that gets thicker, you know, the angrier I get. Or as my wife likes to point out that, you know, if I've been talking to my family recently, I get really North Jersey Italian. Like if I talk to my cousin Vinny or my cousin Poochie or my cousin Bobby, then all of a sudden, you know, I start talking to my wife and it's like, hey, you know, all of a sudden she's living with like Vincent Gambini all of a sudden.
Wait a second. Are you telling me that you seem to have a base of a power that takes the things that they've been exposed to and tends to absorb them and in some way manipulate them into part of who you are, but do it in a way that's much more mature so that it doesn't lead to the destruction of the things that you absorbed from in the first place?
Yes, I am rogue after therapy. I suppose if you want to look at it like that, sure. Whatever works. So recommended reading for Rogue, the Mr. and Mrs. X. I believe it's Kelly Thompson writing. I forget who does the interior artwork, but I know that Terry and Rachel Dodson did the covers. It's 12 issues. It just ended, I think, at some point last year. And it's their married life, Rogue and Gambit. And then you go back a little earlier, and the Uncanny Avengers. As I said, she was part of the Avengers Unity Squad. There's some really good content in there. So we got another review from Just a Little Podcast on Podchaser. I just started listening, but I am hooked, completely blown away. Such a great podcast that portrays mental health in a revolutionary way. The exploration and deep dive in comic book characters is fantastic. The conversations between these two gentlemen is refreshing, honest, and genuine. Keep up the great work. Also, I really enjoy the skits. So thank you very much for those kind words. Please feel free to also leave us a rating and review. If you listen to us on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, you can do it there. You can also go to podchaser.com. You can follow us and leave us a review there. And as we always say, if you leave us a rating and then email us a screenshot of that review to capesonthecouch@gmail.com with your name and address, we will send you a sticker. And I do owe a couple folks stickers for the reviews. I have my kid just got over his broken leg, but I was home with him all the time. And so I was kind of keyed in on that. So I didn't have much of a chance to run the post office. But folks, your stickers are coming. Next episodes, Dr. Doom, Jocasta, and 5 from the Umbrella Academy. So we're really just doing scattershot here with these with the characters. Loving it. Doom especially is going to be thank you, Matt, for adding him. He's always been on our master list, but Matt was like, we're going to bring in Dr. Doom. I get to speak in all caps.
Yes.
So you can find all of our episodes on our website, capesonthecouch.com, alongside the fantastic Ariel and her long box view, the column, which is just, continuing to grow in leaps and bounds. And if you missed it, she had an interview with Scott Snyder from a couple weeks back. So go back and listen to that. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Capes on the Couch. Since we are back from our hiatus, we're back to posting content semi-regularly. And I guess that's it. So, Doc, before I turn it over to you, I just want to say, again, I thought you did a fantastic job covering everything. I really appreciate, how we were able to really stick to the bullet points and cover everything that we were going to discuss, and nobody went rogue.
Nice. Good for you. Good for you. I appreciate that. I was just going to point out that years ago, as a kid, I actually submitted something to Stanley, rest in peace, for an idea of a story involving Rogue, where she actually tried to absorb the powers of Medusa, but then it got shut down because, unfortunately, they would have to call it Rogue Game.
Oh, boy. And here I was so proud of myself. I was like, I'm gonna undercut his pun. I'm gonna hit the pun, and I'm gonna take that away from him, and he's not gonna have anything to say. Damn you.
That's why, when it comes to ranking at the top of the pun list, I'm still Rogue One.
God damn it. For Dr. Issues, I'm Anthony Sitko. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.